As someone who's grown up with superhero shows, comics, and movies, the presence of police has always been a staple of the genre. Whether they're major allies in the hero's stories, corrupt antagonists hampering our main character, cannon fodder for the bad guys to toss around, or to simply show up at the end to call off said villain after the day is saved, law enforcement officers have always been around the superhero medium. But what happens when they're cut out of the equation entirely? Superman and the Metropolis PD have rarely had the same close dynamic that a certain Bat and America's worst-ranked PD have had, but they've historically always worked hand in hand to protect the golden city of Metropolis. But with the more anime-esque My Adventures with Superman, the MPD are not much of a major presence. In fact, they almost seem like to not even exist. What could have caused this sudden shift from showcasing Metropolis's finest to the point of being a non-entity? Besides the obvious answer. Hey team, Phantom Skull, the Super Security VTuber here, and today we're looking at the Metropolis PD and the surprising or not so surprising disappearance from Adventurous Superman's story. We'll be looking at the MPD as an organization, and all the reasons why they might be MIA in spite of the many day-to-day threats lurking in the city. And I mean all the reasons, not just the one that probably made you click on the video. Oh, I'm gonna need so many disclaimers for this one. Before we address the thin blue elephant in the room, let's talk about the MPD as an organization first. The Metropolis Police Department is pretty par for the course for a superhero setting. They're the Golden City's law enforcement tasked with maintaining order and stopping crime big and small. Though that can be hard when you're a city that's a magnet for superpowered criminals, egomaniacal war profiteers, alien invaders, and so on. Thankfully, the MPD also shares a postal code with Earth's greatest champion, Superman. Though the MPD, while not antagonistic towards the Man of Steel, mostly anyway, they're not ones to expect him to do all the heavy lifting. They strive to handle superpowered crime themselves, often through the high-tech and heavily armed division known as the Special Crimes Unit. While not above having problems with corruption and dirty cops, the MPD is a far cry from their almost comedically crooked cousins in Gotham. While their exact natures can vary depending on the writer, either being a shining, uncomplicated beacon of justice, or as violent enforcers for Metropolis's elites such as Lex Luthor, the MPD as a whole was often the gold standard of what to expect out of police in a superhero story. You might notice I used the term "was" there, but let's put a pin in that for now. The MPD doesn't have a lot of notable characters, but the most prevalent two people would know are both SCU officers. Maggie Sawyer, the head of the division and probably known best for being the on-again, off-again girlfriend of everyone's favorite nocturnal sapphic Batwoman. And Daniel Turpin, the surly but well-meaning lawman who was infamously killed by Darkseid during his invasion of Earth. I should specify my knowledge of the comics version of the MPD is very sparse, but funnily enough, those are still the most notable MPD characters overall, which better showcases how minor they are in the grand scheme of things. Overall, the MPD has historically been a pretty standard law enforcement organization for a pre-social media age superhero setting. Noble, courageous, and trying their best to maintain order in a supervillain-filled city, with a handful of bad cops now and then. But then came the latest Superman show, and strangely the MPD are nowhere to be found. And I don't just mean named characters like Maggie or Turpin, I mean any police. Sure, they're referenced existing, you can hear sirens in the background of a lot of action scenes, and we have heard their radio dispatch in the background of some scenes. But physically, they never show up. Like, at all. You never see them trying to deal with the criminals Superman and the gang fight. They're never seen in the aftermath hauling away said crooks. Hell, I've seen more security guards and corrections officers than police. It's like they don't exist. It's bizarre to see such a choice, until you think about everything about the modern era. Time to unpin the grenade and talk about the fall from grace TV and movie cops have suffered in the age of social media and the dark, uncomfortable realities of American law enforcement as an institution. For the longest time, cop characters were unabashedly the heroes of most of our media. The lawmen and women upholding justice from the forces of evil. You had noble men in a corrupt system like Jim Gordon, cowboy cops on the edge like Dirty Harry, and the hot-headed but well-meaning interchangeable detectives of Pick Your Favorite Law & Order series. Oh, Lenny Briscoe, this generation would never appreciate you.
Doesn't look like a robbery. There's no sign of a struggle yet.
Yeah, except for the bullet hole in his head.
But the realities of real-life law enforcement, specifically American law enforcement, never quite matched the rosy, lionized boys in blue of fiction. And the problem has always been there.
I'm just gonna reach into my pocket and take out my flamethrower and wallet.
For every pro-cop show, there was plenty of biting criticisms of them in our media. Tales from the Hood famously had one of its stories based off the murder of Rodney King by police, and the 70s and 80s had its fair share of corrupt sheriffs and police as the bad guys of their movies. Hell, a staple of the noir genre, whose heyday was the 40s, commented on how corrupt and useless police were in dealing with crime when they weren't the ones doing the crime. And as stated, a quarter of Batman's mythos is just how comedically corrupt the GCPD is, to the point of outside of Gordon and a handful of officers, you can't trust them with guarding a crosswalk. While we're mostly discussing American law enforcement in this video, that's not to say other countries don't have their own issues with abuse and corruption with their own Johnny Laws. However, it is a proven statistic that the US is ranked highest in wealthy first world democratic countries, not dictatorships or failed states, when it comes to police killings and use of fatal force. And US law enforcement is often criticized for having much lower standards and abysmally shorter training time and requirements before handing theirs a gun and sending them out into the streets. So the criticism of the LEO's aggressive and often racist policies was always bubbling under the surface. But as social media and mobile recording devices became more accessible, the more that their abuses of power, attempts to frame innocent people of crimes, and flat-out murders of unarmed civilians became ever-present in our psyches. And that razor-thin trust in the system would shatter in 2020 after the infamous murder of George Floyd by a former member of the Minneapolis Police Department. The horrific image of this poor man having the literal life choked out of him by this deranged thug with a badge, who knelt on his neck while handcuffed for almost 10 minutes, haunted the entire planet. The global protests and riots, thanks to law enforcement's negative 100 skills in de-escalation, would be a breaking point with people's resentment and distrust of police after decades of abuse and rarely consequences for those offending officers. Along with the real-life demands for change in policing as an institution, so did our view of police in our media. Cable cop shows and movies lionizing and hand-waving the actions of the boys in blue didn't just fall out of favor with new generations, they dropped like lead balloons. People were tired of the rosy-tinted lie and wanted shows more akin to the realities of law enforcement in the modern era. And this would ultimately affect Cape media given their shared connections to Law and Order. For a lot of the modern generation, they didn't see cops as heroes anymore, and our heroes working with them led to some even being criticized for it. While it wasn't that huge of a controversy, some made a stink about how friendly Spider-Man was with the NYPD in the Sony game, and a bit turned off at how New York's finest were treated as unparalleled good guys, while a lot of metaphors for police brutality and corruption were instead showcased through Silver Sable's very fantastical PMC security forum and Roxxon's goons. So thinking on the MPD's sudden disappearance in Adventure Superman with that modern context, some things might be clicking now. Now, before we continue, I should clarify heavily again that this is all personal opinion and speculation. I have no insider knowledge or connections to the My Adventures with Superman creative team, nor do I present myself as an expert on this. There are multiple reasons we could speculate as to why the MPD are a non-entity even as background characters, but let's entertain the theory that their absence is a conscious choice first. It's hard not to suggest this theory when you look at the show from the same aggressively unapologetic progressive lens I see it with. The show hammers in more than most super shows about Clark's background as an immigrant alien and his struggles with fitting in and his identity. It values the power of diversity and understanding, overcoming hatred and xenophobia, and its most notable villains are basically a checklist for the qualifications to be a modern conservative politician or influencer. But perhaps the most telling is how the most notable source of authority on the show is Checkmate and its Task Force X goons, the xenophobic clandestine military organization that kidnapped and experimented on American citizens to get alien weapons, murdered an entire enclave of scientists for refusing to make weapons for them, and basically committed multiple crimes and abused people's civil liberties, all in the name of protecting them from a vaguely credible alien threat. Made much more blatant when they rebrand into the Human Defense Corps and go full martial law on everyone, spending too much time terrorizing civilians to actually do anything useful during Brainiac's invasion. And of course, we have the cybernetic floating angry white man trope himself, Hank Henshaw. His very brief tenure as a LexCorp superhero was the most unsubtle of police brutality allegories, with his smug obsession with being tough on crime while brutalizing everyone in his way with terrified civilians recording him doing it. During and after the grand supervillain battles, more often than not you'll see firefighters, EMS, scientists, and the occasional security guard being the ones stepping up to help others alongside the Man of Steel, but never the MPD. So yeah, with that context, it's easy to suspect that the series is actively trying to say something about police by making them non-existent in a superhero setting, while highlighting other emergency services and independent guardians. But as I said, that is just speculation. But as a wise random internet person said once, there's a reason nobody's making songs called the Fire Department. But there is another, just as credible reason for the lack of the MPD in the story or background. They may have just had no time for them with their crack-addled 10 episodes full of characters. Yep, time to talk about the show's pacing problems again. I'll be brief here since I brought this up in the Henshaw video, and I've got a whole other video planned for the problems with pacing in shows these days. But given how the show barely has time to give its main villains a crumb of focus with its frustratingly short episode list, and its already ballooning cast and side plots, it's very likely the MPD were cut for time like a lot of things. Why focus on them when we have an ever-finite amount of time to focus on the gang's relationship dramas, or Zor-El's identity crises, or thirsting for a lovable himbo? And to be brutally honest, the MPD has never exactly been a timeless or iconic aspect of Superman's mythos like the Daily Planet crew has. With Batman, the GCPD are an integral part of his mythos because of how deeply tied they are to the themes of corruption and urban rot that makes up Gotham. Cutting out the GCPD from Batman is far more egregious than doing the same with Big Blue and the MPD. They've always just been the average police force in a superhero setting. As sad as it is to bench Maggie and Turpin, they ultimately aren't as critical of supporting characters compared to the likes of Perry White or Cat Grant. The reporter angle has always been the focus of Supes' city side of things, while the MPD were just there. The focus for a lot of Adventure's plots is so razor thin, particularly with Season 3 and all it juggled, that I'd buy it was a case of trimming the fat. But regardless of the reasons, the MPD's disappearance is still pretty notable. Maybe not to some, but to me. As someone who grew up on cable cop shows, and like many had the illusion of that heroic paragon status shattered by reality, it's complicated to discuss the topic of American law enforcement. Yes, it is a broken system. Yes, an unfortunate number of their ranks aren't qualified to be strip mall rent-a-cops, let alone trusted with a gun and qualified immunity. Yes, things need to change. How that change needs to happen is something I can't answer, however. And this isn't to demonize individual cops, because yes, there are good people who are police officers. But much like Commissioner Gordon, one good man or woman in a broken system is just a bucket trying to contain a flood. Look, The masked mall cop may not be the most qualified guy to discuss this topic, frankly, but it would be foolish to pretend that the people's growing distaste for law enforcement in our media didn't just come out of nowhere, or a woke conspiracy theory to undermine law and order as some brainlets have warbled about. End of the day, this is a channel that highlights our heroes. Superman is what I came here for, and his always endearing adventures and loving empathy for all. If any hypothetical Season 4 brings in an adventures version of Maggie or Turpin, I certainly won't be complaining though. Thanks for watching. Hey, thanks for checking out my video. If you liked it, I'd appreciate a like and a comment. Both really help us with finding our place in the algorithm. What are your thoughts about the disappearance of the MPD in Superman's story? How would you write them into the adventure story? And how would you use characters like Maggie or Turpin? Let me know down below. Be sure to subscribe for more Super Security VTuber fun. I also do streams in the evening Central Standard Time here and on Twitch, so come join us one night. I got more superhero video essays in the works, so I hope you come back for more. Thank you all again, and I'll catch you next time.